The village rested on red earth that had been walked on by many generations. Every footprint meant something. Children ran over the same ground where their grandparents once danced during harvest festivals. Goats knew the paths as well as people did. The land was not silent, it remembered. When the wind moved across the dust, it carried old laughter, old cries, and promises made to ancestors who still watched from the unseen world. At the center of the village stood the great baobab trees, wide and patient, their roots gripping the soil like hands that refused to let go. Beneath them were open courtyards where elders gathered at dawn and dusk. It was said the baobabs listened to every word spoken under their shade. That was why lies feared those places. Truth was meant to be protected there, just as the ancestors protected the living. In this village, paper held no power. Voices did. Stories traveled faster than fire, passing from mouth to ear to heart. News of birth, death, joy, or danger moved through spoken words. A child learned history not from books, but from evenings by the fire, where elders spoke slowly, carefully. One wrong word could bend the meaning of a whole story. Here, a good name was worth more than land or cattle. A poor man with honor could stand tall. A rich man with shame walked like a broken reed. Mothers taught their children, guard your name as you guard your life. Fathers warned, what people say about you can open doors, or close them forever. That was why elders often reminded the people, the tongue has no bones, but it can break them. They knew careless speech was a quiet poison. Gossip did not shout like a drum, it whispered like a snake in grass. Among the villagers lived a woman whose eyes missed nothing. She noticed who argued at dawn, who cried at night, who returned home late. Her mouth moved as quickly as her thoughts. When she spoke, her words came sharp and sure, like stones thrown into still water. She believed speaking gave her power. Silence, to her, felt like weakness. When people leaned closer as she talked, her heart swelled. When faces showed fear or surprise, she felt important. If I stop talking, she once said with a small laugh, who will remember I exist? She was everywhere. At the market, her voice rose above the noise of traders. At naming ceremonies, she stood close, whispering observations. At funerals, she spoke softly but left heavy thoughts behind. People expected her presence the way they expected the sun. Villagers listened to her not because she was wise, but because she always knew something. A man might say, I do not trust her tongue, yet still ask, what have you heard? Doubt followed her like a shadow, but curiosity walked beside it. Her stories were rarely whole. Truth mixed with guesses. Concern blended with judgment. She spoke with confidence, and that confidence made weak words sound strong. Elders noticed. One old man shook his head and murmured, a fire does not start loud. It begins with a spark. As the woman walked through the village that evening, dust rising at her heels, no one yet knew how far her words would travel, or how much they would burn. The whispers began softly, like the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. At first, they seemed harmless, small misunderstandings here, a slight offense there. Two women exchanged glances at the market. A husband frowned at his wife over something she could not explain. Friendships frayed quietly, as if invisible threads were being cut one by one. No one blamed the woman outright, but her presence lingered like a shadow, and the tiniest comment could twist into suspicion. Villagers began to tread carefully around her. Some avoided her, fearing what she might say next. Others could not resist her voice. They leaned in, hoping to catch the news before it reached someone else. Did you hear? They whispered to one another after speaking with her, eyes darting as though the gossip itself could bite. She had them caught in a delicate balance, fear and dependence interwoven like the fibers of a rope. Inside homes, her words crept like wind through the cracks of a hut. A father glanced at his son with doubt after hearing her latest remark. A mother questioned her daughter's honesty, her brow furrowed. Families began to murmur, checking each other's stories, questioning the truth of long-held trust. What was once certain now felt fragile, like clay that might crumble with a careless touch. The village as a whole grew tense. Laughter was quieter, and greetings carried caution. People paused before speaking, unsure whether silence was safer than sharing. Eyes watched, ears listened, and suspicion hung in the air like morning mist. Harmony, once taken for granted, began to waver. And somewhere in the heart of the woman there was no fear, only a spark of excitement. She did not yet see the storm her words could summon. Her tongue moved freely, planting seeds she did not yet understand. A shadow loomed, quiet but inevitable, waiting for the wind to rise. It started subtly, a remark about a young couple that shifted the way neighbors viewed them, a comment on a respected elder's decision whispered to a friend. Decisions once guided by wisdom now bent under invisible pressure. Marriages, family arrangements, even who was invited to ceremonies began to change because of what she had spoken. People noticed outcomes before realizing the cause. Choices that once seemed natural now carried the weight of rumor. She had no title, no official power, yet villagers found themselves acting as if her words were law. A woman declined an invitation she had been waiting for, whispering to her husband, "She said it's not safe." A young man avoided a match he had admired, thinking he might bring shame if the gossip proved true. Her heart swelled with a quiet pride. She felt the sway of influence in every nod, every cautious step. She did not see the damage trailing behind her, the fear, the doubt, the broken trust. She believed her words were gifts, her knowledge a form of power. Pride without understanding. Authority without responsibility. And yet, envy gnawed at her. She watched the well-respected women, the mothers whose words carried wisdom, the families whose names were honored, and she longed to leave her mark where theirs had grown strong. "Let them see what I can do," she whispered to herself, the fire in her eyes reflecting the golden sun. Her tongue sharpened like a spear, ready to pierce the confidence of those she envied. Soon, the words stopped being stories told for amusement or conversation. They became weapons. A casual remark could ruin a reputation, a small exaggeration could redirect loyalty, sow doubt, or ignite conflict. People began to tread carefully, not because she asked them to, but because her words had power they could not resist, and harm they could not yet see. The village, once steady, began to feel the tremors of what one tongue could unleash. The once respected household now moved under a shadow. Whispers curled through the walls like smoke, slipping into corners where sunlight had never reached. Neighbors paused in the street to glance at the gate, lowering their voices when passing by. A slight frown here, a questioning glance there, as if a silent curse had settled over the family. They had been honored, trusted, a pillar of the village, but now even a small cough could spark suspicion. Inside the home, eyes no longer met with ease. The father glanced at his son over the evening fire. "Where were you this afternoon?" he asked softly, though he already feared the answer. The mother brushed her hand across the daughter's arm, murmuring, "I hear things. Tell me the truth." No proof existed, yet doubt had planted itself like a stubborn weed. Words that once built trust now twisted it into silence. Conversation became careful, measured, each syllable weighed for danger. Outside, the elders watched quietly. Their eyes, sharp as hawks, traced the movements of youth who repeated rumors without thought. "Have they no patience?" muttered one elder, his brow furrowed. "Do they not know what it costs to speak without truth?" The younger villagers laughed at caution, sharing every tale as though speed alone gave it power. Tradition seemed forgotten, replaced by the thrill of gossip unchecked. Families began to circle themselves, dividing along bloodlines and loyalties. Friendships splintered quietly, alliances shifted, and grudges settled into long corners of memory. Mothers whispered warnings to daughters, brothers spoke quietly in shadowed huts, and neighbors glanced suspiciously at each other in the market. The village was no longer a single heart beating, it was a set of murmuring parts, each listening more to rumor than to reason. Communal councils, once the heart of problem-solving, lost their voice. Open discussion died beneath the weight of fear. Decisions moved behind closed doors, guided by whispers, avoidance, and secret judgments. The elders tried to call for calm, but even they found their words diluted by rumor, their authority challenged by the invisible hand of gossip. Harmony, once taken for granted, was slipping away. The elders gathered beneath the baobabs one evening. "Remember," one spoke, his voice deep and steady, "our ancestors did not give us tongues to wound. They gave us words to bind the village together." The youth listened, some nodding, some rolling their eyes, impatient for the next sensational story. "We speak too fast," said another elder. "The weight of each word carries the memory of those who came before. Do not break it." But the young shook their heads, choosing the speed of rumor over the patience of truth. The woman's voice, ever present, became the face of recklessness, her tales moving like a river in flood, shaping thought before reason could settle. And the village felt it. The moral center wavered, traditions weakened, and the careful balance that had held families together now trembled on the edge of a storm. A single story slipped from her lips one morning, as easily as the mist rising from the red earth. She had spoken it without malice, simply to fill the quiet, to weave herself into the rhythm of the village. Yet once it left her mouth, it began its own journey. By noon, ears carried it to the market, to the well, to the children playing near the baobab trees. Each repetition added weight, each retelling a subtle twist. By evening, the tale was almost unrecognizable, and where once it was harmless, now it bore the sting of accusation. Neighbors whispered in corners, glancing over shoulders. "Did you hear what she said?" a man muttered, clutching his basket tighter. The story shifted with each mouth it touched. An innocent remark became proof of impropriety, suspicion masqueraded as fact. What had started as a casual tale now carved lines of doubt into hearts that once trusted each other. Innocent people began to suffer. A young mother found herself avoided at the market. Children's games turned silent when her family approached. Shame settled like dust over those who had done nothing wrong. The elders shook their heads in sorrow, muttering, "The tongue has no bones, yet it can break them." The woman watched all this from her doorway, unease prickling at the edges of her mind, though she tried to dismiss it. But the story had slipped from her grasp. She tried to call it back, to correct the exaggerations, but words now had a life of their own. "Stop!" she whispered to the wind, but the tale did not obey. It was alive, twisting, growing, and she could no longer shape it. Familiar faces began to avoid her gaze. Children no longer ran to meet her in the street. Neighbors crossed the road rather than approach. "She has spoken too much," some said softly, shaking their heads. In public, she held her chin high, smiling and greeting with practiced warmth. Yet behind the smile, she felt the hollow ache of distance. She was alone in the crowd, her voice powerful, but her presence questioned. At home, silence hung heavy. Her family moved cautiously, fearful of being seen with her, wary of the judgment carried on invisible winds. The air in the house seemed thick, the hearth quieter than before, and even laughter felt tinged with shame. And inside her, a war waged between pride and guilt. Her tongue had given her power, but that same tongue had wounded those she never meant to hurt. Nights brought restless thoughts, and her heart wrestled with the consequences that could no longer be ignored. She realized, too late, that words, once free and playful, could never again be harmless. The morning sun had barely touched the red earth when the woman's words crossed a line no one had dared to name. A single accusation, spoken carelessly at first, became public, carried from hut to hut. "Did you hear?" whispered one villager. "They say it is true." By noon, the rumor was no longer a whisper but a proclamation, echoing across courtyards, markets, and the sacred space beneath the baobabs. It was no longer a story, it had teeth. A respected man's name was stained before the entire village. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs became gasps of shock. Plans for marriages were questioned. Alliances between families wavered. Even the village chief, normally calm and measured, felt the tremor in his own authority. Mothers clutched their children, fathers frowned deeply, and those whose honor was unassailable began to feel the weight of suspicion. "How could this happen here?" asked one elder, shaking his head. "In our village, we have always protected truth." Drums of alarm sounded, figuratively at first, in every hurried step and murmured warning, and then literally, as the village drummers struck their skins in urgency. Fear spread faster than truth, outpacing reason. "Someone must speak. Someone must act," cried a young man, eyes wide, voice trembling. Chaos stirred where once there had been calm, and even those with the clearest judgment found themselves trembling before the frenzy. The elders stepped forward beneath the great baobab, their faces grave, voices low but firm. "Wait," one called. "Let us speak before we act. Let the truth guide us." But anger answered first. The crowd surged, words flying like arrows, pointing, accusing, trembling with energy that could not yet be tamed. A mother clutched her daughter, a traitor froze mid-step, a child hid behind a father's legs, all witnessing the storm born of spoken words. By sunset, the village seemed turned upside down. Harmony, once steady as the rising sun, had collapsed. Courtyards that held laughter now held whispers and suspicion. Even the wind seemed to carry fragments of accusation from one end of the village to the other. The cost of careless speech was plain. The community, whole and living together for generations, had fractured in a single day. Slowly, painfully, the truth began to emerge, like bones uncovered in dry earth. Facts crept forward, stubborn and reluctant, revealing what had been distorted. "It was not as she said," murmured one elder. "The story bends with each mouth that repeats it." Contradictions surfaced, dates, details, intentions, all unraveling the fabric of lies that had spread so quickly. The elders traced the path of words as one follows footprints in dust. Every hut, every conversation, every eager ear led them closer to the source. And there, standing alone, the woman faced them. Her head bowed, eyes wide with fear and shame, she felt the weight of every ear that had listened, every heart that had suffered. "You spoke, and the village suffered," said one elder softly, "yet the words carried the weight of the mountains. Do you see now what words can do?" As she looked around, she saw the reflection of the village in its own pain. Parents, children, traders, and friends, all had been caught in the storm of a single tongue. The suffering was shared, collective, and undeniable. The gossip had not just broken trust, it had revealed how fragile that trust had always been, a lesson written in tears, silence, and the red dust that held the memory of every footstep. The woman stood at the edge of the village square, her head bowed, shoulders heavy under the weight of shame. Once, her words had flown freely like birds over the red earth, carrying curiosity and attention. Now, each syllable felt like a stone tied to her tongue. Eyes that once leaned toward her in expectation now avoided her, turned down the path, or filled with quiet judgment. She felt the fear in her chest, the sharp regret twisting in her stomach. The laughter that had once followed her words had vanished, replaced by murmurs of sorrow and suspicion. She saw, finally, the ruin her tongue had wrought. Homes once safe with trust were fractured, families whispered in corners, eyes darting with doubt. Children no longer played freely in the streets. Her identity, built over years of chatter and observation, now revealed itself as hollow, constructed not on wisdom or respect, but on the subtle art of harm. Every compliment she had disguised, every tale she had embellished, had left trails of suffering in its wake. And yet, she was not alone in the burden. The village itself bore guilt, for listening without question, for finding thrill in rumor faster than comfort in truth. The elders shook their heads gently, their faces marked with sorrow, as if to remind all that trust was a shared responsibility. "We have allowed the wind to carry fire," one elder said softly, "and now we must live with the smoke." A silence fell where once her voice had ruled. The market, the courtyards, even the open space beneath the baobabs, all seemed suspended in a stillness that pressed against the heart. Eyes met eyes, and no one spoke, each reflecting on the fracture caused by both words and listening. Broken trust hung in the air like dust, thick and settling slowly over the village, marking the reckoning for all to feel. The land itself seemed to answer the moral collapse. Clouds gathered above the red earth, wind rising in soft gusts that rattled roof thatch. A storm murmured in the distance, the scent of wet soil signaling renewal but also warning. Dust swirled where the wind touched, and a single lightning flash illuminated the quiet faces, reflecting the village's shame and the weight of the lesson learned too late. Beneath the baobabs, the elders gathered in a circle. "Speak not for vengeance," one began, voice carrying calm authority. "Speak for truth, for restoration, for learning." Punishment was measured, a mirror to correct, not destroy. The woman knelt, listening, as her actions were acknowledged and the path forward outlined. Her shame was personal, but the lesson belonged to all. Whispers of blame mingled with murmurs of reflection. The villagers understood how their ears, hungry for news, had fed the wildfire of her words. Justice carried mercy, a balance that allowed the community to see both the cost of carelessness and the possibility of redemption. Silence lingered afterward, heavy but necessary. It pressed against hearts and minds alike, giving space for sorrow, contemplation, and the first hints of healing. The red earth drank in the pause, the wind held its breath, and the village learned, in quiet and in full, the enduring weight of words spoken and believed. The woman walked slowly along the path she had once dominated with her words, each step quieter than the last. She carried bundles of firewood and water to neighbors' homes, swept the courtyards, and helped with the children's chores, never speaking unless asked. Her first gestures of humility were simple, almost invisible, but the village noticed the absence of her sharp tongue before they saw her acts of labor. She began listening more than speaking, tilting her head when someone shared news, absorbing the cadence of their voices, their laughter, their sorrow. Slowly, she learned the power in silence, the patience to wait, the wisdom to reflect before speaking. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the red earth, she whispered softly to herself, "Words can heal as much as they can harm." It was a lesson she carried in the quiet chambers of her heart. Hands busy with service, her mouth no longer sought the thrill of gossip. She repaired fences that had weakened, mended broken pots, and helped a young mother with a sick child, her presence steady but unobtrusive. Each act, small as it seemed, began to reshape the community's perception. Where rumors had once poisoned, her actions now nourished. Trust was not returned at once. Some watched with wary eyes, hesitant to believe her transformation, measuring each day with quiet skepticism. But slowly, as weeks became months, the villagers noticed a change. She spoke only when necessary, offered help without expecting recognition, and bore no resentment toward those who had doubted her. Like clay shaped by careful hands, the bond between her and the village was remolded over time, patient and deliberate. Endurance and discomfort accompanied her redemption. Pride wrestled with humility in her chest, and the pain of remembering the damage she had done lingered like shadows under the baobab trees. Yet with every act of service, every day of restraint, she earned a new identity, one built on responsibility, reflection, and the slow but steady reconstruction of trust. Families began facing each other with honesty rather than fear. Confessions of hurt were met with forgiveness, and eyes that had once avoided each other now met with tentative warmth. The elders, seeing the restoration, reinforced the sacred laws of speech, reminding all that words carried ancestral weight, and with weight came responsibility. Harmony returned, not as it had been, but wiser than before. Laughter returned to the courtyards, children's games echoed along the red paths, and even the wind seemed lighter as it brushed through the village. Stories were told again, but now with care, passed from mouth to ear like a sacred flame. Each tale was measured, each lesson deliberate, ensuring the fire of oral tradition brought warmth and guidance, not destruction. The woman, kneeling beneath the oldest baobab, felt a quiet pride, not in power, but in the balance restored around her, a harmony earned through patience, humility, and the long journey of redemption. The village gathered as the sun dipped low, painting the red earth in hues of fire and gold. Elders sat in a circle near the fading embers of the communal fire, the smoke curling like memories into the evening sky. Children leaned close, their eyes wide with curiosity, while adults listened with quiet reverence. The story of the woman who had spoken too much was retold, each word measured, each pause heavy with meaning. "Remember," said the oldest elder, his voice deep and steady, "words are seeds. What is spoken will always grow. Some seeds bear fruit of peace, others burn the fields of friendship and trust." The villagers nodded, understanding that every careless phrase could ripple through lives like water on stone. The tale of the gossiping woman became more than a story. It became a warning for those yet to come. Mothers whispered it to their children beside the hearth. Fathers spoke it when teaching the young men and women how to act in the world. Each retelling carried the weight of generations, a lesson sewn into the fabric of village life. She was remembered not as evil, but as a sign, a reflection of human weakness, the temptation of power through words, and the pain that unchecked speech could bring. The villagers spoke her name softly, neither curse nor praise, but with the awareness that all hearts carry the same potential for harm or healing. When the fire dwindled, and shadows stretched across the courtyards, elders leaned closer to remind the young that stories were more than entertainment. "The fire may grow low," said another elder, "but the lessons it lights remain. Listen, learn, and let your words serve, not destroy." And so, silence became a chosen companion. Reflection replaced haste, and responsibility settled in the hearts of those who heard the tale. The village knew now that wisdom came not from speaking without thought, but from restraint, careful listening, and the courage to let actions, not rumors, shape the world. In this quiet understanding, the community thrived, carrying the lesson forward with the patience of the baobab, strong and enduring.